Welcome to Starbound, where every star tells a story. Have you ever considered what happens when a galaxy questions humanity's compassion? Let's get into the story. Admiral Jason Clarke gripped the polished obsidian armrest so tightly his knuckles turned white. Not from fear, no, but from simmering rage. The grand summit hall, buzzing with 1,000 alien voices, felt more like a battlefield than a diplomatic forum.
"Compassion, Admiral. You must be joking,"
rasped the tundral delegate. Its eyes glittered with a cruel amusement shared by most of the gathered representatives.
"Your species coddles criminals, harbors dissidents. It's a glaring weakness."
Clarke held the tundral gaze. Compassion is our strength, delegate. To care, to empathize, that's what separates us from cold logic and rigid hierarchy. A wave of mocking laughter rippled through the hall. The brutash ambassador, her plumage shimmering with disdain, trilled. "Perhaps in your primitive stage of development, Admiral, the galaxy has moved beyond such quaint notions." Clarke had heard it all before. In their eyes, humans were bleeding hearts, too naive to survive the harsh realities of the cosmos. He was tired of defending his species' greatest asset, a trait that made them unique, that fueled their progress. The summit droned on, but Clarke only half listened. A sense of restless energy thrummed beneath his skin, a familiar itch to be out among the stars, not trapped debating philosophy with creatures incapable of grasping simple human decency. It was a relief when the summit finally adjourned, granting him a few precious hours before his next scheduled appearance. Seeking solace, he headed for his assigned quarters, yet as he passed through polished corridors lined with shimmering alien tech, the echoes of the summit clung to him. Doubt gnawed at the edges of his convictions. Was the galaxy right? Was compassion truly a luxury humanity couldn't afford? "Stars curse them all," Clarke muttered, slumping into a plush chair within his quarters. The cool, synthetic material was a poor substitute for worn earth leather, but it was the closest thing to home this side of the galaxy. He glanced at the small framed photo on his desk. His wife and children. Their smiles a beacon across the vast interstellar gulf. It was their memory, the countless, small, compassionate acts of ordinary people that held his resolve firm. A chime broke his reverie. It was a priority comm signal, standard green for routine matters, but the ID code made his heart lurch. Lieutenant Harris, his lead scout, rarely used this unless it was an emergency. "Clarke here," he answered, his voice taut. "Admiral, we need to see you on the bridge, sir. It's big." Harris's usual jovial tone was replaced by a tremor. Minutes later, Clarke strode onto the bridge of the flagship Voyager, Harris hovering nervously near the tactical display. The rest of the crew held an almost frantic energy, a far cry from their typical professionalism. "Report," Clarke barked. Harris pointed toward the holographic display. At first, it was just a jumbled collection of static and interference, but then a pattern emerged, a desperate pulse cutting through the cosmic background noise. "Distress beacon, sir. Unknown origin," Harris said. "We picked it up while charting the outer edge of the Altorian system." Clarke frowned. The Altorian system was largely unexplored, deemed low interest due to a lack of habitable planets. "Any trace of the source?" "Not yet, sir. We're triangulating, but the signal's weak, fragmented. Like whoever sent it doesn't have much time." The grim sense of foreboding washed over Clarke. That beacon wasn't just a cry for help. It was a heartbeat fading into silence. He faced a choice. A defining moment, not just for himself, but for humanity. Ignore the plea and uphold the galactic status quo, or risk everything on a species they didn't even know existed. Clarke's mind raced. Orders from high command were clear. Avoid first contact without prior approval, especially in fringe systems with no strategic value. Deviating from protocol could mean severe censure, perhaps even the end of his career. Yet, could he live with himself knowing he turned his back on a species in desperate need? "How strong is the signal?" he asked, his voice cutting through the bridge's tense silence. Growing faint, Admiral. If we don't act soon, it might go dark altogether, Harris replied, worry lines etching his youthful face. The crew turned to him, their expressions mirroring his own inner turmoil. These men and women weren't simply soldiers. They were explorers, humanitarians at heart. To abandon a potential civilization in its hour of need is unthinkable. Yet the rules were there for a reason, weren't they? Uncontrolled first contact situations had led to misunderstandings, wars, even extinction events in the galaxy's long and turbulent history. Still, that flicker in his crew's eyes, it ignited something within him. Clarke had always been more than just a military commander. He was a believer in the boundless potential of humanity. If anything defined them as a species, it was the spark of compassion, that drive to protect, to heal, even in the face of the unknown. Set a course for the signal's origin, Clarke commanded, his voice firm. Maximum warp until we can ascertain the situation. A flicker of surprise, then relief, replaced the crew's apprehension. Voyager surged forward, thrusters cutting through the silent expanse of space like a blazing comet. With every astronomical unit crossed, Clarke felt the weight of his decision settle heavier on his shoulders. The potential consequences were astronomical, even for an experienced admiral. The galaxy wasn't known for its kindness, after all, but there was also a strange exhilaration, a familiar tingle of anticipation that coursed through his veins whenever he faced the unknown. This was more than duty. It was a chance to prove the galaxy wrong. As he stared out at the swirling starfield, he wondered what they would find. Was it a natural disaster, an attack by a hostile force, or something else entirely? The galaxy held countless mysteries, but none tested his conviction like this, the very essence of human compassion against the cold indifference of the cosmos. Voyager surged through uncharted territory, the distress beacon growing clearer with every passing hour. The bridge was a whirlwind of controlled chaos, navigation charting their path, sensor teams analyzing the signal fragments, and tactical formulating potential response plans. Despite the urgency, Clarke enforced a measured pace. Any misstep now could escalate a delicate situation into a full-blown disaster. Any luck decoding the signal? He asked Comms Officer Lee. The young woman shook her head, her brow furrowed in concentration. It's scrambled, sir. Not encryption, more like damage. But they're in linguistic patterns. We're running them through the universal translator. Clarke paced the command deck, his boots thudding softly against the metallic floor. His instincts, honed by countless missions, told him this was no simple distress call. The sheer desperation within the fragmented transmission spoke of an extinction-level event. But what could threaten an entire species so completely? Hours turned into a full day, then two. The restless thrum of Voyager's engines echoed the rising tension within Clarke. The unknown was always a daunting prospect, but the knowledge that lives hung in the balance magnified the pressure 100-fold. Finally, Lee's voice cut through the tension. Admiral, I think I have something. Clarke rushed to her station. Glowing lines of an unfamiliar script filled the display, interspersed with fragments of translation into galactic standard. Imminent catastrophe. Planetary aid. The words were broken, halting, but the underlying plea was unmistakable. Source? Clarke demanded. Single planet, Admiral. Outer fringes of the system. Minimal tech signature. We should have spotted them on our long-range scans. His eyes narrowed. A species capable of sending out a distress beacon, yet nearly invisible to standard sensors. It didn't add up. Any sign of hostile activity? Negative, sir. No unusual energy readings, no debris fields. Whatever's happening down there, it's not a war. Which left them with a far more unsettling possibility. A natural disaster of apocalyptic proportions. The realization crashed over Clarke like an icy wave. To face an enemy, you could strategize, fight back. But against a cataclysmic force of nature, the potential for devastation was staggering. Even Voyager's advanced tech might not be enough in the face of a planetary collapse. Yet the faint pulse of the beacon persisted, a plea, a defiance of annihilation. He couldn't let that flicker of hope fade into silence. Helm, prepare for orbital insertion, he commanded. Sensor teams, full spectrum scans. I want to know every damn thing happening down there. As Voyager breached the outer atmosphere, the planet materialized on the view screen, a stark world of cracked earth and churning storm clouds. Scans revealed seismic instability far beyond any natural norm. The planet's core, it was fracturing. "Sir, they're facing a total destabilization event," the science officer reported, his voice taut. "The whole planet could shatter within hours." Clarke's gut clenched. An entire world, a civilization hanging by a thread. It was a nightmare scenario, the kind that haunted his dreams of Earth. "Comms, open a wideband channel," he ordered, his voice echoing through Voyager's bridge. "Prepare a universal greeting message." Minutes stretched into eternity. Finally, a weak voice crackled back through the speakers, hesitant, filled with a mix of fear and desperate hope. The universal translator stuttered at first, then snapped into focus.
Who is this?"
"This is Admiral Jason Clarke of the Terran vessel Voyager. We received your distress signal. How can we assist?" Stunned silence filled the channel, followed by a jumble of voices, some shrill with panic, others choked with what Clarke recognized as disbelief. Then a single voice cut through the chaos, stronger, tinged with a weary authority.
"Admiral, we are the Valeri. Our world is dying. Please, we beg for your help."
A ripple of shock washed over the bridge. Despite years of exploring the galaxy, encountering countless alien species, this felt different. There was a raw vulnerability in the Valeri's plea, a stark contrast to the usual posturing and cautious diplomacy of first contact. "Valeri, we stand ready to assist," Clarke responded, carefully measuring his tone to convey both urgency and reassurance. "Please describe the nature of your emergency and your current situation." The Valeri leader, their voice identified as Elder Kaya, relayed a chilling tale. Their planet, long thought stable, had suffered an unexplained surge in tectonic activity. Cities were crumbling, vast fissures splitting the land. Attempts to stabilize the core had failed, and their limited evacuation efforts were woefully inadequate to save their population.
"We had resigned our fate, Admiral," Kaya's voice wavered. "But your arrival, it sparks a hope we had lost."
Clarke glanced at his crew. They mirrored his own grim determination. Voyager was an exploration vessel, not an interstellar rescue ship. Yet to do nothing, to leave the Valeri to annihilation, it was unthinkable. "Elder Kaya, I will be honest," Clarke said, choosing his words carefully. "We are ill-equipped to evacuate an entire planet. However, we will do everything in our power to save as many of your people as possible." Static hissed on the channel for a moment before Kaya's reply, tinged with cautious optimism.
"Your compassion is unexpected, Admiral. We will gather our people at designated evac zones. May the stars guide you."
With the transmission closed, Clarke turned to his officers. "Priority 1, identify suitable landing sites. I want engineering to start prepping emergency shelters, medical pods. Tactical, we need an evac plan, and fast." Voyager became a hive of activity. The crew wasn't just following orders, they were driven by a deep, primal instinct to preserve life. Clarke felt a surge of pride, not only in his crew, but in humanity as a whole. This, he realized, was more than galactic politics. It was proving what it meant to be human, their compassion, their defiant response to a cold, indifferent universe. The transition from exploration vessel to humanitarian ark was swift and jarring. Voyager's corridors, usually echoing with the hum of scientific analysis, now thrummed with the chaotic energy of disaster relief. Crew members raced with crates of emergency supplies, medtechs ran simulations for treating unknown physiology, and engineers jury-rigged every available space into temporary shelters. Clarke paced the command deck, his admiral's uniform feeling more like a straitjacket than a symbol of authority. He desperately needed more information. "Comms, open a channel to High Command. Emergency priority." Minutes later, he faced the stern visage of Admiral Singh on the view screen.
"Clarke, explain this blatant disregard for protocol. We intercepted your transmissions. You're jeopardizing a first contact situation.
Yes, sir, I am, Clarke admitted, squaring his shoulders. Permission to transmit situation report? Singh glared but waved a curt assent. Clarke relayed what they'd learned, the impending planetary collapse and the sheer desperation of the Valeri. When he finished, the comm line was filled with a tense silence.
The Council will not tolerate this level of risk,
Singh finally declared, his voice clipped.
You are ordered to withdraw immediately. Let this species meet its natural fate.
The words echoed in Clarke's eyes, a cold reminder of the galaxy's indifference. With all due respect, sir, I refuse that order. The Valeri are a peaceful people facing extinction. I won't abandon them.
You have orders, Clarke. This is insubordination, barked Singh.
Clarke took a deep breath. This moment would define his career, possibly end it. Sir, he said, his voice firm, I swore an oath to protect lives. That oath didn't specify they had to be human. The comm signal cut off abruptly. He stood alone on the bridge, the weight of his defiance almost unbearable. Now, they were truly on their own. Helm, plot a landing trajectory, he ordered. We're going planet-side. The descent through the doomed planet's atmosphere was a trial by fire. Storms lashed Voyager's shields, seismic tremors rattled the ship, and the ground below was a jagged canvas of crumbling cities and splitting chasms. Even with advanced inertial dampeners, the crew was jostled mercilessly, their professionalism doing little to hide streaks of genuine fear. Clarke stood rigid on the bridge, staring as targeted landing zones shifted and warped beneath them. Each violent tremor might erase a potential safe haven, another beacon of hope snuffed out before they can even reach it. Sensor update, he barked, clinging to the command chair. Sir, the ground instability is worsening, Lieutenant Harris reported, his youthful face pale but focused. We're losing potential sites by the minute. Clarke glanced at the tactical display. Hundreds of green dots representing Valeri evacuees swarmed towards designated zones, a desperate countercurrent against the planet's death throes. Thousands more blinked frantically in the depths of collapsing cities. Too far, too late. Every dot was a life, the impossible scale of the disaster crushing Clarke's resolve like gravity. Helm, lock in on the 3 largest clusters, he commanded, his voice sharp against the backdrop of the ship's straining groans. No matter the risk, we're getting our people topside. Admiral, with respect, these zones are practically inactive fault lines, the helmsman yelled over the commotion. Landing there is suicide! Then it's a suicide mission, Clarke shot back. We didn't come all this way to play it safe! Now execute my damn order! A flicker of awe replaced the fear on the helmsman's face. He saluted and brought Voyager around in a groaning arc. The bridge crew, inspired by their admiral's defiance, fell into line. Humanity, it seemed, wasn't just about compassion. It was also about an insane, stubborn refusal to accept defeat. The first landing was a symphony of chaos. Voyager descended through a whirlwind of ash and debris, repulsor beams barely keeping the unstable ground at bay. Shelter pods and medical units were deployed the moment the ramp hit dirt, crew members shouting over the roar of geological fury as the first wave of Valeri evacuees surged on board. They were a disheveled sight, scaled skin smudged with soot, eyes wide with a mix of terror and fragile hope. Children wailed, elders stumbled, and yet Clarke saw an echo of humanity in their fear, a stark reminder that behind the unusual biology beats hearts just as vulnerable, dreams just as precious. He supervised personally, guiding the dazed Valeri, the touch of his hand on a scaled arm a gesture of reassurance across the species divide. Yet for every life they ushered aboard, 100 more remained trapped on the dying world. Back on the Voyager, the bridge was transformed into a triage and command center. Valeri medical knowledge, patchy as it was, combined with human adaptability to treat injuries and shock. Crew bunks were offered without hesitation, standard rations adjusted and augmented with emergency supplies. Voyager was stretched beyond any designed purpose, the ship groaning as much from the physical strain as the sheer weight of lives crammed into every corner. The landings were a relentless cycle of life and death. For every evac zone salvaged, 2 more collapsed into the abyss. The bridge crew functioned on adrenaline and willpower, their faces a reflection of the mounting exhaustion and heartbreak. Harris, the ever-present spark of youthfulness now extinguished, slumped over his tactical console. "Sir, the core fractures are critical," he mumbled, barely audible over the roaring static. "The planet will tear itself apart within the hour." Clarke gripped the console so hard it cracked, a mirror of his own fraying control. "We have 1 hour," he said. 1 hour to save who we can." The final descent through the planet's disintegrating atmosphere was a journey into hell. The sky blazed red, great chunks of crust torn free and swallowed by the maelstrom below. Voyager was battered and bruised, hulls singed, shields failing intermittently. On the bridge, the crew clung to their stations more through sheer will than any technical restraint. "Last evac zone," Clarke gritted out, ignoring the alarm klaxons and flashing warning lights. "We make one final sweep and get the hell out of here." The ground below was a nightmare landscape. Buildings lay in twisted rubble, fissures swallowing fleeing figures whole. Then a flicker of motion amidst the chaos. A knot of Valeri trapped and gesturing frantically at the sky with a mix of terror and desperate hope. "We can't land, sir!" the helmsman shouted, wrestling with the groaning controls. "The ground's liquid under us!" "Give me a damn landing solution!" Clarke roared, his usual composure shattered. Lieutenant Harris, fueled by desperation, leaned over his console. "Transporter lock! We can beam them directly aboard if we get close!" It was a mad idea, pushing their transporter tech to the absolute limit in such unstable conditions. But it was their only hope. "Do it!" Voyager dipped lower, repulsors churning the liquefying ground into a swirling, superheated vortex that threatened to swallow the ship. The transporter room crackled with frantic energy, beams slashing into the heart of the chaos, plucking terrified figures from the brink of oblivion. Then, the planet itself rebelled. A seismic shockwave rippled outward, slamming Voyager with brutal force. Systems wailed, lights flickered, and the ship began a sickening sideways slide toward a fiery chasm. "We're losing control!" the helmsman cried, straining against the useless yoke. "Break orbit, max power!" Clarke ordered, his voice echoing in the suddenly silent bridge. The engines screamed in protest as Voyager sluggishly pulled away, leaving the final few Valeri to their fate. The planet they left behind was no longer a world, but a splintering, molten inferno, consuming itself in a final act of cosmic fury. The ascent was agonizing. Every tremor of the ship felt like a death knell for those they failed to save. When they finally broke free of the dying planet's grasp, what lingered in the view screen wasn't a celestial body, but a funeral pyre, glowing sullenly amidst the cold indifference of space. Voyager limped away, scorched, overloaded, and filled with a mix of weary triumph and devastating loss. On the bridge, a suffocating silence settled heavier than any cosmic debris. Clarke stood rigid before the view screen, hands fisted at his sides, staring into the fading inferno. "Damage report," he finally rasped, the words feeling like shards of glass in his throat. Hesitant voices filtered through the comms. Hull integrity compromised, minor casualties, transporter systems on the verge of collapse. The list went on. Every word a testament to the price they'd paid. "And the evacuees?" Clarke asked, dreading the answer. Comms Officer Lee looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "Approximately 2,000, Admiral." The number hung in the air, insignificant against the backdrop of a planetary annihilation, yet crushing in its own right. 2,000 souls given a chance at survival, while countless others perished in the flames. "Admiral," Harris began, his voice hoarse. "Singh was right. We risked everything. Did we even make a difference?" Clarke turned slowly. He saw his own doubt and guilt mirrored in the faces of his exhausted crew. They were explorers, humanitarians, not saviors. The galaxy had delivered a brutal lesson in the limits of compassion. He took a deep, shuddering breath. "We did what we could," he said, his voice stronger than he felt. 2,000 lives that would have been lost are safe because of us. That's the difference. He paced to the center of the bridge, addressing his crew. Make no mistake, we have scars from this, but we are not broken. Patch up this ship, tend to our wounded, and give the Valeri the sanctuary they deserve. He saw a spark rekindle in their eyes. It wasn't the bright blaze of idealism before, but a quieter flame, tempered by harsh reality. As for the Council, Clarke paused and a grim smile touched his lips. Let them come. Voyager drifted through space, a wounded haven carrying the survivors of a cataclysm. Medical bays were filled to capacity. Makeshift shelters overflowed into corridors, and the gentle hum of engines was a constant reminder of their precarious state. Yet an undeniable energy thrummed through the ship, a defiant pulse echoing the heartbeat of the saved Valeri. Caring for the refugees became the crew's sole focus. Replicators churned out strange concoctions tailored to Valeri biology. Engineers cobbled together rudimentary translators, and exhausted medics ran on fumes as they bridged the gap between two unfamiliar physiologies. Among the Valeri, the initial terror subsided, replaced by a profound gratitude that transcended language barriers. Eyes that had witnessed the end of their own world now looked to Clarke with a mix of awe and uncertainty. Their elder, Kaya, his scales dulled with grief, yet his spirit unbowed, sought him out on the makeshift command deck. Admiral Clarke. He bowed his head, a gesture mirroring respect across countless species. Your actions, they defy understanding. We did what had to be done, Elder. No more, no less, he replied, his exhaustion finally catching up to him. Yet you faced your own doom, to save a people unknown to you. Why? Clarke paused, searching for words the translator might never truly convey. Compassion isn't logical, Elder. It's a force within us, as vital as any drive to survive. It fuels our actions, sometimes even against reason. Kaya tilted his serpentine head, the action strangely endearing. The Council scoffed at your compassion, called it weakness. Yet here we stand, alive because of it. He stared at the dim outline of their lost planet through the viewport. Maybe. Or maybe we're just damned fools who don't know when to quit. The Elder let out a sound surprisingly like a chuckle. Perhaps, Admiral. There is wisdom in such foolishness. The trial that followed was as much political as physical. Voyager limped back into known space, carrying news of a humanitarian mission gone rogue. Clarke, prepared to face a court-martial, was instead greeted by a tidal wave of galactic controversy. The Council raged, demanding reparations and citing reckless endangerment. Yet voices Clarke had never expected rose in his defense. The Tundral, long the harshest critics of human sentimentality, begrudgingly acknowledged the bravery of his actions. The Brutash, their initial disdain replaced by a grudging intrigue, saw a potential propaganda windfall, a tale of survival fueled by an alien concept. And most importantly, the Valeri. Their rescued voices, barely a trickle at first, grew into a chorus that drowned out the Council's outrage. The galaxy was forced to witness the undeniable results of human compassion, a species on the brink, now given a future.